Hello everyone, Inquisitor Vaughn here, and today we are going to talk about the Nihilakh dynasty, which is one of the Necron dynasties in the Warhammer 40k universe. Before we begin, I just want to apologize if my voice sounds a bit weird or if it's cracking or something of that nature or it sounds stuffy. It is because I have a cold. Now, I tried to wait out the cold and so my voice would be better, but I just wanted to produce this for you all. I'm trying to do a certain number of videos a week just to be a little bit more productive about the channel, right? So if you hear that, I apologize, but I just wanted to get this video out to you all, and so I'm pushing through it. All right, so let's get into it. The Nihilakh dynasty is a Necron dynasty with a territory to the southeast of Terra near the Ultima Segmentum. The heraldic color of this dynasty is said to be light teal, and its dynastic Ankh, shown here, serves as the basis for the Overlord, Lord, and Phalanx symbols. The use of the Ankh as an inspiration for these symbols is an illustration of the Nihilakh dynasty's use of a strict military hierarchy. As with many of the Necron dynasties, there's not much information on the past of the Nihilakh dynasty. In regards to current history, when the Nihilakh rose from the Great Sleep, they awoke to find their once glorious domain in ruins, like most of the other Necron dynasties did when they awoke from the Great Sleep. However, they quickly got to work consolidating what strength they could to their crown world of Giden, and they became fiercely territorial in guarding it as well as the rest of their dynastic territory. However, they have always been fiercely territorial, and this is because the Nihilakh dynasty are arguably the wealthiest of the Necron dynasties in terms of assets and acquisitions. What is known about their past is that in those ancient times, the Nihilakh built treasure worlds filled with wealth and material taken from thousands of lost civilizations. This material wealth is something that the dynasty likes to flaunt by decorating their legions with it, having their cryptex add precious turquoise and jewels to the necrons of their dynasties, or otherwise coloring parts of their necrodermis gold. It's not just their wealth that they are showing off, it's also their military strength, through which they were able to acquire such wealth. However, due to this wealth, they are fiercely territorial to the point of isolationism. If we follow the implications of what history we do know about the Nihilakh, I think it's safe to assume that the Nihilakh dynasty is one of the older Necron dynasties, and we can base this off the fact that their wealth is from 1,000 lost civilizations, and their acquisition of those being from the quote-unquote ancient past. If the Necrons were asleep for 60 million years and the wealth they accumulated was before that, then this points to their wealth being acquired during the War in Heaven, and possibly even before that. If we look at the statement about wealth being from 1,000 lost civilizations, the majority of those civilizations were Xenos and were likely created by the Old Ones in the War in Heaven to combat the Necrons during the conflict. Being that the Old Ones, meaning the Slann, could technically be considered one of those lost civilizations, being that they were mopped up by the Necrons during the war, a lot of the Nihilakh wealth of turquoise and gems could be from them, as well as primitive Eldar, Krork, and many others. This emphasizes their military strength during the war, and it's this military strength that they are proud of still to this day. Another interesting thing to note is that though it says in their lore that their territory was in ruins, it doesn't specifically say that their dynasty suffered any casualties to their legions during the Great Sleep, which suggests that the Nihilakh territory is nearly at full strength, and that their tomb worlds were relatively unscathed during the Great Sleep. I think this can also imply that, given the information we have, that the reason why their territory was in ruin was because they probably couldn't help but flaunt their wealth in some way during the Great Sleep, which made them attractive to other species and which probably led to them being robbed by other species during the Great Sleep. The current pharaoh of the Nihilakh dynasty is Crispek, And the only thing that really makes him stand out as a figure is that he has changed the traditional isolationism of the dynasty and is instead leading it on a conquest of expansion outwards, seizing and heavily fortifying new territories with Noctilith pylons before moving on. Now, something that I thought about recently was, why would the Necrons even want or need to expand their dynastic territory? As Necrontyr, expansion meant survival. But now that the Necrontyr are now Necrons, expansion is mostly a power move or a grab for resources. It's not like Necrons can be created anymore. They are eternally reassembled through a combination of Necrodermis armor and command protocols. And so any expansion that is done would be done to secure resources which would add strength to the dynasty. These resources include Noctilith, the anti-warp black stone that assisted the Necrons during the War in Heaven, but it also could mean the material necessary to make more Necrodermis. And I say that because we know that the Necrontyr created Necrodermis and were able to still do so during the expansion on the worlds they settled on when they left their homeworld. Now, more Necrodermis means more weapons and more machines of war, which means more power and military strength. And so this would explain why the Nihilakh are starting to expand outward. They are looking for more resources to make themselves even more powerful. The further and further away from the crown world that the Nihilakh, expand, the worlds that they acquire will become fringe worlds. And so what they're doing is really creating like this boundary of fringe worlds that goes ever outward, and it kind of protects the crown world as a whole, and it makes their dynasty even stronger and more able to protect and defend. But going back to the characters of the dynasty, the Nihilakh dynasty is host to one of the most prominent figures in the Necron faction, Trazyn the Infinite. Now, Trazyn is an overlord of the Nihilakh dynasty who rules over the world of Solemnus. As a Necrontyr, he was a scribe and a chief archivist who oversaw the modification of Necrontyr pharaons. Though the Lord does not specifically say this, he was likely these things for his own dynasty, meaning the Nihilakh dynasty. Trazyn awoke earlier than the rest of his dynasty and sought to expand his existing collection of artifacts in the meantime, and he is the reason why the Nihilakh are in possession of many relics and artifacts from humanity from the 30th millennium onward. He is an overlord, and as an overlord, he has his own Necron legions to command, and he frequently sends out lords and other Necrons in his place to collect objects for him. Many times, enemies think they've killed Trazyn, but in actuality, they've just destroyed another Necron who might look like him. Trazyn offers his services to other dynasties such as the Sautek and the Nekthist, even though he himself is of the Nihilakh. However, he is not trusted due to his proclivity of theft when he wants something. Just another interesting fact about Trazyn. Another interesting thing is that the Ankh on Trazyn's chest piece is not the Ankh of the Nihilakh dynasty, or at the very least, it's not the current Ankh of the dynasty. And I find that to be cool because, Ankhs, as we have discussed in other videos, they change over time. And so maybe the current version of the Ankh is the modern version, whereas the Ankh on his chest, which has been referred to as the Nihilakh Ankh, is the older version of the Ankh. Another figure that I thought was part of the Nihilakh dynasty was Orikan the Diviner, primarily because of his Necrodermis color scheme, but he is officially not listed as being part of the dynasty. He is a cryptic though, and so as such he is free to offer his services to anyone he chooses, and in the current lore, he is offering said services to the Sautek dynasty. Orikan is an astromancer. He's able to interpret the arrangement of stars and tell the future, as well as travel into the past and change current events to an extent. The story of Orikan is actually a tragic one, as a Necrontyr who was too physically frail to be a warrior, and by warrior what I mean is the current version of the Immortal, because we're talking about him as a Necrontyr, and as Necrontyr, the the people who would become the Necron warriors were actually lower class citizens. And so in this situation, as Necron tier, a warrior is the current version of the Immortal, or the current form of a warrior is the Immortal class, right? So he was too physically frail to be a warrior, and so he eventually took up the Necrontyr art of mysticism. He was one of the Necrontyr who spoke against biotransference, serving as a court astromancer to the Triarch during that time. Still, biotransference did occur, and though he himself refused the process, he was forced into the furnaces in chains. Well, at least that's according to the old lore. In the new lore, it says that he underwent the process in loyalty. However, I think that the old lore is a bit more accurate in that regard, because Orikan no longer bears any Ankh on his chest piece. He doesn't bear the Nihilakh Ankh or the Triarch Ankh either. It's just this hole where there is no Ankh. And because he doesn't have an Ankh, that's what made it initially hard for me to determine what dynasty he actually comes from. But then again, due to his long-standing rivalry with Trazyn the Infinite, and him remembering Trazyn's biotransference process and the colors on his necrodermis, he is likely Nihilakh in origin. Orikan is also interesting because he doesn't believe Necrons should go back to being creatures of flesh and blood, but that they should become beings of pure energy. This is something that he has planned to happen to him at the right time when the planets align and the stars align in a certain way. He's just going to become pure energy. This is also a common belief in pursuit of many Necron cryptics. Though Crispek is the current pharaoh of the Nihilakh, the previous pharaoh, Shimvok, still exists. Shimvok's physical body was destroyed relatively recently in the lore during the Pariah Nexus War. It was his body that was destroyed, but he himself was quote-unquote reincarnated into another body by the cryptex. However, the destruction of his previous body likely caused the command protocols of his dynasty to be passed on to his successor, which is why Crispek is now the pharaoh of the Nihilakh dynasty. In regards to dynastic assets, the Nihilakh possess a crown world of Giden, which has withstood the test of time and is practically invulnerable to attack from enemies because it is half-phased in a pocket dimension for all but a few hours in its stellar orbit. In the 9th edition codex, it is referred to as the Planet of Shadow, but it is not explained why it was called that. Now, if I were to speculate, it is called the Planet of Shadow because the side of the planet which is half-phased in a pocket dimension is likely the side facing its sun. So, no matter what, the side that is visible receives very little to no sunlight, making it a shadow environment, and practically making it invisible as well, which has contributed to its invulnerability. On Giden, the Nihilakh possess the animated head of a Xenoseer, which the dynasty uses to predict the future. This seer is another reason why the Nihilakh are able to efficiently defend their dynastic territory. However, using the seer, they have peered even further into the future. Whatever it is that they have seen has caused the Nihilakh dynasties to gather their legions for war. If I were to speculate about what they've seen, I would assume that what they've seen is war with the Eldar, because if you look at their dynastic territory and you expand a little bit outward, you'll see that there's a craft world Elatok there, and so eventually there's going to be conflict between the Elatok Eldar and the Nihilakh dynasty. But of course, they could have seen something else and are preparing for that as well. Another asset to the Nihilakh dynasty is the World of Solemnus, which is a tomb world possessed by Trazyn the Infinite, where he houses all of his accumulated treasures. The world is actually artificial, and it basically has solar panels around it that collect the energy that's given off by the planet and uses that energy to power the world. All of these memes that exist on the 40k universe, and no one has made a meme about how the Necrons are literally the advocates of solar energy in the 40k universe. But back on topic. In regards to the color scheme of the Nihilakh dynasty, their heraldic color is teal, but according to official artwork and studio painting, there is also a lot of gold in their scheme. Unlike other dynasties, even the lowly warriors of the dynasty feature their heraldic color in their color scheme, and the higher the rank, the more gold, with vehicles being more covered in teal than the warriors because, as with most dynasties, the vehicles are seen as more valuable than the warriors themselves. Like literally the only reason that warriors feature teal anyway is because the nobles of the dynasty do so to illustrate their wealth to the enemy. The Nihilakh color scheme is very similar to the Subakar dynasty, which also has a light blue in their scheme as well. The subtle difference is that the Nihilakh scheme is primarily gold with teal blue as a detailing in stripes and lines on the armor, whereas the Subakar armor is primarily blue with gold detailing. There are exceptions to this rule, but overall the Nihilakh have more gold than blue, and the Subakar have more blue than gold. Now, of course, everyone can paint their own miniatures how they see fit, but according to the basic standard of the color scheme of the Nihilakh, a lot of people who say that they're playing the Nihilakh dynasty are actually playing the Subakar as far as how they paint their Necrons. So, just to do an overview of the information that we shared in this video, the Nihilakh are the wealthiest of Necrons in terms of acquisitions during the War in Heaven. They are basically at full strength, are extremely territorial and militant, and have recently begun to expand their territories outward. They have allied themselves with the Silent King and the Zorekan dynasty, but some of its figures like Trazyn and Orikan do work with other dynasties like the Sautek and the Nekthist. The dynasty's heraldic color is teal, with their scheme officially having more gold than teal, and they possess the head of a Xenos seer, which they use to tell the future, determining the position of enemies and determining their next move. The current pharaoh of the Nihilakh dynasty is Crispek, but the only reason that Crispek is the pharaoh of the dynasty is because the previous pharaoh, whose name was Shimvok, was recently destroyed during the War for the Pariah Nexus. Now, even though Shimvok's body was destroyed, his consciousness was transferred into another Necron body by the Cryptex. But when his body was destroyed, it passed the command protocols to his successor, which was Crispek. So Crispek leads the dynasty and is the pharaoh, but Shimvok still exists. He's just not the pharaoh anymore. And Crispek is, I guess, he's an important character because he has changed the traditions of the Nihilakh dynasty. They were once very isolationist and very territorial, but now he's leading them to a conquest of expansion. They're going to be seizing more worlds and seizing more assets. And last but not least, Trazyn the Infinite is one of the more prominent members of the Nihilakh dynasty. He is a collector of artifacts. He has a bunch of things on Solemnus that a lot of parts of history as far as the 30th millennium and human history, as well as the Nihilakh dynasty overall just has a bunch of treasure from previous civilizations, most of which were Xenos, and among which were the Slan and the Old Ones. And that has been my deep dive into the Nihilakh dynasty. Now, here's the thing, right? Besides the Nihilakh dynasty having a really cool gold and blue color scheme and it just looking really awesome when put together, and also having Trazyn the Infinite as one of their main characters, there's not much that's really interesting about the Nihilakh. They're just rich and they're wealthy and they're paranoid and about their wealth, and so they're defensive of their territories. But I don't know. Their story doesn't really capture me. It just sounds like stereotypical rich people who have a lot of wealth and then they become paranoid about it and they just become defensive about it, right? They want to hold on to that wealth. They want to hold on to that power and that status, and that's not really interesting to me. They do have a very cool color scheme, I will admit. And if you want an army that has like a very striking, eye-catching color scheme, it would be the Nihilakh. The Nihilakh color scheme reminds me of like the Tomb Kings, like the ancient Egyptian kind of gold and blue and gems. It would be cool to see people really going hard with their with their dynastic nobles and like putting little gems or like painting little gems on their necrodermis, because that's mentioned in their lore that they have gems put on their armor as well. So I don't know, it's just really cool. It also says in their lore that they have like relics that they carry around during battle as a way of like showing how competent they are in battle. There are a few correspondences between the Nihilakh and the Subakar, not only their color scheme, but some of their cryptex behavior and things of that nature. I really just think that the Subakar just didn't make the cut. And so instead of the Subakar, we got the Charnavok and the Nihilakh. And the lore for the Subakar was kind of like split between the two. But that's just me speculating, not really seriously about that. But it's like a lot of the themes are just repeated in the Nihilakh dynasty. I also find it interesting how, because Orikan has basically turned his back on his own dynasty and basically the Necron Empire and is just committed to becoming a ball of energy, how the Nihilakh nobles have to depend on its like decapitated this decapitated alien head to tell the future, because like Orikan is gone now. And that's one of the points that I feel like is kind of like reminiscent of the Subakar lore, because the Subakar chopped off a head of one of the Charnavok messengers, and the Charnavok used that to decipher a message. And so like there's this theme of like decapitation that's similar between the two. But beyond that, I know I'm just reaching, but still, like I find it interesting that they have to depend on this alien seer, because their own seer is like, you know what, I'm not even gonna mess with you guys. But yeah, so that's been my deep dive on the Nihilakh dynasty. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I am going to be continuing this Necron deep dive series as we go over more of the dynasties and their characters and a little bit of their lore, trying to determine how far back they go and just analyzing aspects of their lore. Well, without anything else to say, Inquisitor Vaughn out. Remember, the Emperor protects and the future is successor.